Good afternoon, folks. All right. Okay, so since last time I had asked you to try and do this Get It Done app. Getting some lag here. So if this happens to you while you're using the VM, you can wait, but sometimes if you just disconnect, and then let's see if I can switch to this connect. Okay. Let's see. Do they have the directions on here? Yes. Okay, so you can watch the video or you can do it this way. So we're going to start taking a look at this using database with our web app. All right. And so the directions in this material is using PHP myadmin. We are going to use the command line with MariaDB. So now we'll need 3 tabs open, most likely. One for the server, one for us to commit, and one for us to communicate with the database if we need. Now that's going to be important here in the beginning for setup, but later on, we won't really be talking to it that much unless we're making changes that affect the database. So I'm just going to open another tab here. All right. And we'll make this visible more visible. There we go. And what is this saying? System restart required between 0 and 4 Sunday morning. Okay, well, I'll just wait and let it do it itself. All right, so let's check what branch we're on. We are working on Studio 5. So we need to move on to 6. Okay, so, wait, did we do 5? I think this is Studio 6. Let's see. Nope, that's Studio 5, and we did this already. We set up the app to work with using a database, but we didn't do anything involving creating the database or creating something called using an object relational mapper, which we'll take a look today at how to set up the database, and then we'll take a look at what is an object relational mapper. It sounds scary, but good news, it actually makes things a lot easier for us as developers to communicate with the database. All right. And then once we get through this one, you'll be ready to do the Build a Blog project, where you can kind of try to do this stuff on your own. Okay. So let's take a look at flick list 6 here. All right, we're finally ready to add persistence in the apps, which means we can store data between accesses. When someone accesses the website, they can log in, and we can tie that login to any data that we need to store for that user or for that session or whatever. Okay. Okay, we'll start with the walkthrough 6 here. But let's go back. Somewhere they should be talking about setting up. I think it's in the Get It Done app. So if we go back here to the prep work of 7, we have it must be in the next one. You know, these ones that we're skipping are more about just independent of what you're using it for, just stuff about how to use a database in general. Okay, so we want the Get It Done app, and let's look at project setup here. It says, well, it's just going to show a video. Let's try database configuration. Okay, so we need this package here, Flask SQL Alchemy, which is SQL Alchemy is our object relational mapper. So we'll need to get that, and then to allow Python to communicate with MariaDB, we need this PyMySQL package. So we'll get those. I think we can just do pip install Flask SQL Alchemy and pip install PyMySQL. Let's see if that works first. All right. Let's try pip install Flask -SQL Alchemy. And then I've already got mine installed, so it's saying, hey, you already got it. And then we'll do pip install PyMySQL. See if that works. And it says, oh, you already have that. So for you folks, it should add that in. This is a very important step. Can't use, can't do anything if you don't have this. All right. And then we need to make sure to include this in our Python code in our main.py, this from Flask SQL Alchemy import, and then pay attention to the capitalization here. This package, this module, sorry, which will give us access to functions using the object relational mapper SQL Alchemy. All right, and we'll have to make sure we can set up a connection between our app and the database. But before we do that, we need to set up the database. All right, and to do that, we need to first make sure the database is running. And if not, we have to start it. So I think it's service MariaDB status. Okay, it is inactive right now on mine, so I'll do service MariaDB start. That'll turn on the database. And we have to provide our password. Hopefully this is the password just for the, yeah, this is for the workspace. All right, now that that's running, okay, that one I'm using for the server. This one I'll be using for GitHub. So this one, third one will be my database terminal. So I'll go Maria, you just do MariaDB. Or is it MySQL? Okay, it's MySQL. So there's a little bit of a backstory about MariaDB and MySQL. MySQL was a product, and some group thought, hey, this isn't being supported right, and they extended it out, and I think it's free. I think MySQL was free too, but anyway, it's just a difference of anyway, we open it with MySQL, but it's called MariaDB. That's not confusing, right? Okay, and so you'll see now we're in the terminal, or we have the prompt for communicating with the database here. Where it says none, this is telling us we currently have no database selected, right? So we're gonna have to create a database and then do some setup so that we can communicate with it using the app. So the first thing they want us to do is in our main, after we import, okay, so I'm just going to use the flick list 5 as my demo for just getting the database set up, because I think in the studio it'll have that for us, but you need to know how to do it. So in the main.py, remember we need to do from flask underscore s. Let's make sure we're getting the name right. Just copy it in from flask SQL alchemy, import SQL alchemy, and okay, and we'll go ahead and save to make sure it's not mad at that. It says it's fine, or it doesn't. What's it say? Unable to import flask SQL alchemy. That's fun. Let's see if it's in there for sure. Okay, and we'll just go here. We'll just put pip. See what that does. Okay, we want to do pip list. Let's try that. All right, make sure we have, okay, we have SQL alchemy. Did I type that as SQL alchemy but not flask SQL alchemy? Let's see. C, D, E, F, G. Flask dash SQL alchemy. Let's try using this name. So remember, when you're copying out of the terminal, it's Control-Shift-C. And we'll do Control-V in here. Now let's try saving it. Okay. Oh. Yeah, we can't have a dash in there. That is annoying. See if it finds this. Nope. Alright. So it's finding Flask. Let's just try SQL Alchemy. Nope. Huh. What am I forgetting here? Flask dash SQL Alchemy. And what did they have in here? They had Flask underscore. Flask dash here. Let's try it again, I guess. As flask underscore SQL alchemy. Save that. It says unable to import. Let's see. Let's just try it. Maybe it's lying to me. Nope. It says the server will not run. Oh, it's not running right now. Let's try it. Alright, it says it's working there, so I'm sure the problem here is something's wrong with this pylint that I'm using. Anyway, we'll see if we can use it. So once you have the module, Flask SQL Alchemy module in there, the next part is creating the object to represent our connection to the database. So, right, so here we want this. This creates the connection to the database. And we'll have to change this to match how we have the database set up here in a second. All right. And I like to put this little note in here so you can see what exactly it's asking for, because this is just a connection string. So this is the username. Here is the password. Here is where it's going to connect to. And this last one after the slash is the name of the database. All right. So we either need to change the database to match this, or set up the database and then change this string to match what the settings are, or both. However you want to do it. We'll go back and fix this when it gets mad that we can't connect. Okay. Save that. And now we need, well, let's see what happens. It says da 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 da. Name app is not defined. I think that's just because we put the code too high. Down here is where we're creating the app, and so after that is where we want to change the config for the database connection string after this. That'll fix that problem. Whoops, I better take the whole thing, right? All right, that should make that happier. And let's try running it again. Okay, kind of scary that it's not worried about this, but I'm not actually trying to connect yet. That's when we'll get the error. Okay, so we'll also set the SQL Alchemy echo value to true inside of the config. What that does is it allows errors caused by the SQL. If you write SQL errors into your code, this will catch the output from the database server and spit it into the terminal for the web server so that we can see those errors. Now, why do we have to turn this on? Because you don't want this to happen in a in an app that people are using, because if they can get those error codes in the queries, then they know more information about how that information is organized, and that could help them get what they need to steal private information and stuff. So that's why it says down here we have the debug mode on, so we would turn that off too. and that is being set right here. App config debug equals true. Displays runtime errors in the browser. So if we don't want those errors there, we just set this to false. Okay. I'll move this up here because it's kind of with the creating the app. This is changing the database connection, and then this is setting the debugging for database errors. Okay, make sure it's all happy with that. Check the server. Okay, it's still going. Next, we need to create an object that will allow us to manipulate the database. And so we'll call that DB, and we'll create it by passing in our app into SQL Alchemy. Okay. And it's funny because up here it says I can't find this, but I'm importing it and using it right here, and it's not mad about that at all. So let's see. Still working. What does this say? Okay. It's just warning you not to keep the SQL debug on, because it printing all of that out every time someone manipulates the database through your app, it creates a ton of overhead. Okay. So the first part of using an object relational mapper is creating an object in Python and connecting it to a table with records in the database. And then we can make changes to the object and commit those changes, and it will translate it into the SQL we need to manipulate the database. Okay? And when we pull information out of the database, it will be stored in an object that we can manipulate in Python. So object relational, object being the server code, in this case Python, and relational being information from a relational database. Object relational mapper, it maps the two together so that you don't have to take a bunch of extra steps to do that yourself. Alright, so here in this example they are creating, what is this? This is the get it done database. So they have a class of, oops. Trying to make it easier to read, and it's just going everywhere. Okay. They're creating a class in Python here. And so you'll notice it's a lot simpler than C#, but it has its own set of problems because of that. All right, so we're saying this, the objects we create from this class, they'll use our db.model, which comes from up here where we created the db variable to represent our database as an object by using SQL Alchemy and our app. This pulls the settings out of the app that it needs to create this object, which I believe is that connection string and the debug thing, all of that. Okay. And so now we create an object that will represent a table inside of the database. And then each instance of the class, or each object, will represent a row or a record in that table. So look at what we're defining. So in there, if we want to think of this in terms of an ER diagram, the entity is task. These are the fields, ID and name. All right, and then instead of writing this in SQL, create table task, then we would put, ID, varchar, whatever, and any other settings. Then the next one, we don't have to write that in SQL. We can create it as an object here, and then they're referring to the fields. So remember the columns in a database, or fields or attributes. They're referring to those as columns here. So remember, a field is a column. I like how you're starting on the last boss. All right. Have you ever played this before? No. Okay. It's probably hard. That's hilarious. All right. That gives you a second to digest. It looks like there's one person here. If I had to guess, it's Andy. Hopefully. Let me know if that's you, Andy. If not, say hi. Let me know who it is. You realize, whoever's here, you realize the fact that, you know, this information is complicated, and you're gonna have to figure it out. So I'm trying to help here. Anyway, so we have ID. You know what I can do? Can I do this? Let's see. Let's do a new sheet. So I can kind of give you another view of what's happening. So this is what it would look like in the database. Okay, ignore the fact that this is a spreadsheet. We're going to say the task table. Okay, we've said it has ID and name. Okay, so setting up the class creates this structure. A table with two fields. So when I want to, if I create an object of this, I have to provide an ID and a name, so that when I add it to the database, it'll take that ID and name and store it as a record in the database. All right, and then if we, you know, every time we add one, it will add that in. So if we're creating new data to go in the database, we have to create a class that represents that data. So the class kind of represents the table. It's like how I like to think about it. And then the properties of the class, like ID and name, those are the fields. Okay. And then we need to give it this constructor method, which in Python, the way they've set up object-oriented programming, the constructor uses this kind of reserved word structure of 2 underscores, init for initialize, and then 2 more underscores. And anytime in Python, when you're calling a method of an object, it always has to pass in the first argument, always has to be the object itself. Why that is, it has to do with the way Python works, and we don't need to worry about that. We just need to know when we're creating this method, we need to include self first, and then you can put in any fields that you want to create here. So in this case, they're just giving a name for the name of the task. They are not doing that for the ID because I believe they are going to generate a different ID for each task on their own. Okay, but let's take a look at these properties. Okay, so we're creating a db.column object, and we are storing it in a variable called ID. And the properties here, the arguments are for setting up the properties. db.integer, that's setting the data type. And here we're setting the foreign key constraint, or I'm sorry, primary key constraint to true, which means we're identifying this ID as the primary key. Okay. And if you guys thought this was confusing before, now we're introducing, you know, databases as another technology here. We haven't even got to the what is the basic web app at this point. This is, you can't do it without this, and so, you know, if you're feeling overwhelmed, you got to put in more work to get this stuff. You can't just do one assignment and figure it out. I mean, I'll give you the grade for it, but when you, when I test you to see if you actually know this stuff, then it's up to you to make sure you know it, because you're going to be doing this in the job potentially. All right, anyway. For the name, they're setting db.string120. So what this means is create this field, and the name will be a string, and it's limited to 120 characters. Okay, anyway, in our example, we'll go ahead and copy this just as a, starting point. And we'll go ahead and create. Did I forget a step here? Nope. Okay, good. So we'll create a class. Right, but instead of task, let's call it a movie. And our movie had, we'll go ahead and give it an ID. They have names, and they have a thing about whether it's been watched or not, and a rating. So we can go, boop. So it's always going to be db.column, and then db dot, I wonder if you could just put, is it bool or boolean for this one? I don't know. Why would I use a boolean data type for the watched property? See if you can figure that out. And rating is, it's a number of stars, but, do we want to store this as an int or a string? If you store it as a string, you can just pull the value right out. If you store it as a number, you will be able to change the symbols you use for the rating. I don't think it even has you do that, so let's see if we can figure that out. But you'll have to convert it after you pull the data. So you have to create your own function for that. Okay. So I'm going to do it as an integer, but it's going to tell us to do it as a string. So later, when we get to the next version that's built on, starting point, this will be different. But I think this will be a good example of what you can do. So we'll just make it an integer. And why is this mad now? Oh, because I haven't saved. All right, so our class of movie has these columns. And we'll put a name, watched, and rating in there. So when you create a new movie, you need to provide the name. You know what? We don't need to provide whether it's watched, because if you're adding a movie, it's going to be false that it's been watched. Rating will start out as 0, so we can do self.watched equals false. There we go. It's caps in here, apparently. In Python, self.rating equals 0. So now when we create a new one, we have to tell it the name, and then it sets up the other fields to their defaults. All right, make sure everything's good. Check the server, make sure it's still running. Make sure to discipline your dog if it's being bad. All right. Server, which one is it? Nope, this one's the one we're going to use for Git. This is the one we're going to use for the server. Okay, start it up. It is working. So no problems yet, syntax-wise. Okay, so far in our program here, we're just gonna, for this example, we're just gonna create a movie. class. So our database will consist of only one table, and that table will have records that have 4 fields. And so we'll only ever need to put records into this table and pull them out. And so, I think the assignment that you guys are working on or last was user sign up, is that right? Yeah, user sign up. And there you had to create users and passwords, or, a login. So we will eventually have multiple tables, is what I'm trying to say. Because the next project is a blog where you'll have to have users log in. No, that's the next one after that. Build a blog, you'll just make, I think you'll have users and you'll have posts. But the last one, blogs, combines everything we've done into a web app. Okay. Okay, this says be sure to shield app.run by enclosing it in an if condition. Here, let's see if we're doing that. Should be automatic in here. No, it's not. Okay. So what this does is it checks to make sure the code that it's running is from your main file. So that way, because Python is interpreted, it's easy. That makes it easier for people to get code in there, and so when it's interpreted, they can kind of gain control. So we put this in here to prevent that. You don't have to be using databases to do this. This should just be a normal thing. Okay, it just happens to be now we're talking about it. Okay, so we need to go back to the terminal and open a Python shell. How do you do that? Alright, so I'm just going to do this in the GitHub one for now, but you could create a separate one if you want. You just type Python, and then so these 3 little things here, greater than signs, this is how you know you're in Python. So you could do something like print Py, and then it gives you the output, or print 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 465. Okay, so you can just run Python code in here. But what we want to do is, now that we have our class set up, our movie class, we can use the object relational mapper to take our class, it's up here, our movie DB model class, okay, and tell our object relational mapper to create a table called movie with these fields so that we don't have to manually do it. So to do that, all we have to do is get into the Python shell, follow these steps, from main, import db and task, and so what is that asking us to do? And so to paste, I'm doing Control-Shift-V, don't forget. From main, import db and task. So what is db? That is our object that represents our connection to the database. Okay, we need that to tell for this code to know how to connect to the database. And then task was the class in the example. We are going to call ours movie, so we'll change that to movie. So now we have those 2 things, which means we have access to all of the functions and data from these 2 from the variable here and the class of movie. And we also can do this command, db.createAll. So this is part of the object relational mapper. What this is going to do is look at all the classes you've created in here that are using the db.model and create them as tables. And so this is not going to work, but let's try it. Okay, so it says can't connect to the server on yada yada yada. Okay, so let's go back to our database one here. To get out of this, you can type quit. Actually, let's not do it there. Let's get out of Python. You have to use quit as a function to get out of Python. Okay, so it's quit parentheses. It puts this back here, and we want to see the information on MariaDB, which I don't have in this terminal, so let's do service MariaDB status. Okay, okay. Well, first we'll need a database. So they're using this pattern of naming the database after the app. That just helps you keep it straight. So we'll do create database flick list. And at the end of your SQL lines here, you got to remember to put a semicolon. I always forget. Access denied for user at localhost to database flick list. Okay, so we don't have permission to do this as we are. So we need to go back here. Let's see, I've got to refresh myself. I have some information that needs to be reorganized about this. It's hard to keep up because everything keeps changing, you know. So it's kind of a bonus to see me try to figure it out, because you're going to be having to do the same thing later, next time it changes. Okay, I thought I put it at the top. Am I in the right class? Yeah. All right, let's go Maria. I didn't delete that, did I? Oh, here it is. Database stuff. Okay. It's in one of these. Let's go Flask this PDF file. Alright, here were the commands that we needed to get in here. So if we type, when we connect to the database, or I'm sorry, when we open the database, if we use the -u, that's for username, give it the username, and then -p, it'll use that as the password. By default, this is set up in a very unsecure way, where the full access to the database is an account called root with no password, which is very common. Well, they're all set up that way, so if you don't get rid of that before you go to production, you should change it right away. You're leaving yourself very vulnerable. So let's get it working first, and we'll get back go back and see what's going on. Okay, so is it quit? Yeah, so just to get out of the database, you do quit, and then we want to do MySQL -u root -p. And it says enter the password, enter. Okay, so now I'm in as root, which should allow me the permission I need to create database flick list. All right, now we have that database. If we want to see that, we need to do use flick list. And now we can see we're using MariaDB. We have the flick list database selected. Now we can, is it show tables? It says there's no tables. Okay. What was I trying to find? We need to know the connection information. MySQL MariaDB port. All right, we're just connecting on our own server, so we just give it in the connection string here. Remember, we need the username. Okay, so we don't want to put the whatever account we have that controls the entire database information in here. And what we can do is create a new user with the name of the app as its username, and then we can give it whatever password we want and tell it to use the right database, and only give it permission to use that one database. So that way it can't access anything else. If we have anything else, we can limit what the app can access. So we need to change the username to flicklist, and I'm going to change the password to flicklist, and we are going to connect on the local host, so that's correct. Let's try port, what did it say? 3306, and we're gonna, what database are we gonna use? Flicklist. So do you see a pattern here? As you're using databases in the future examples, you need to follow. You can follow this, and that way you'll know username, Don't make the password the username in you know, real life. But just for the sake of, you're going to have multiple of the, you might be working on multiple different databases and apps at a time. In this class even, it's easier if you just keep it simple. All right, make sure that works. So let's try going back into Python. I feel like I missed this. Oh, we didn't create the user yet. So we need to, in MariaDB, we need to run the command that will create a user and set its permissions to only use the flicklist database, and I have that here. In my beautiful handwriting from, you know, 2 or 3 years ago. I wanted to compile a list of the commands, so I decided to use a piece of paper and scan it. Okay. But at some point, I'll find time to make this look better. And the app I used to convert this into a PDF has text recognition that I'm really curious to see how well it works. So, yeah, that's not right. All right. Okay, so in this database, we're going to do create user, flicklist at localhost. Create user flicklist at localhost. Okay, if it didn't give you an error, it's saying query was okay, no problems. We did, you have to assume we did what you said. If you wrote it wrong and it still worked, we did what you said. And it's on you at that point. All right, so we're going to do grant all privileges on flicklist.star to flicklist at localhost. So grant all privileges, that's SQL, to on, then you give the name of the database, flick list, and why are we putting dot star? We're saying, okay, they can just have permission for any table in this database. So that way we don't have to worry about it later. Now we have to tell it who can use it. Well, the username is the same, so flick list at localhost. They can use all privileges on flick list. Those privileges include creating tables, inserting records, pulling information out, and basically everything. Those are some examples. Don't forget your semicolon. You have an error in your SQL syntax, check the manual, flick list at localhost. Let's try just, oh, did I miss a keyword here? To, I forgot the to. It's easy to forget. To properly structure this. Okay. So traditionally the keywords in SQL are written in all caps, so that way you can parse it easier mentally, you can read it easier, and understand what each part is. Okay, that said, okay, that's fine. So now our app is going to log in to the database as flicklist with the password of flicklist. Dang it, I didn't set the password. Okay, let's go back. All right. That would have been much easier. I forgot this. Identified by my new pass. Okay. That's how you specify the password. So let's see what happens if I try to create it again. Oh, it's fine. Okay, so let's go in and do identified by. Now we have to try to remember if I put quotes around this to remind me to change this, or if I put quotes around it because it needs quotes. Probably because it needs quotes. So what password did we want it to have? Flick list. And semicolon. We got that. Okay. It says, okay, that's fine. So now it should be able to connect. 3306. Let's see what happens. Well, the server's still running, so that's fine. I don't think we changed anything in there. What we were going to do is open Python, and then we need to do the from main import db and movie. So one is a variable that represents the database connection, and basically everything about the object relational mapper and such. Movie is a class we created to store information about movies. Let's see. Okay. La da da. Everything's good. It connected. Maybe. Anyway, now we do the command db dot. I don't think it connected. I think it just did. It just imported the code from those. Okay, db dot create underscore all will take all the classes and make them into tables for the database. Create underscore all method. And here, since we put the output of the SQL, it's showing us, all right, we did based on the code we wrote, this is the MySQL SQL syntax for creating a table that matches that object. So we don't have to create it in two places. We create it in one, and we can update it by using these Python commands. But you don't want to put these commands in your app because these create the database. You only want to do these once or whenever you update the database. Okay, so now we got this. If we go back to the database, and we're in the flick list database, we can say show tables, semicolon. We have a movie table now. And if we select star from movie, semicolon, it says there are no records in there. So we have one table, no records. We could do insert into movie. You know what? I wonder if MySQL, Boolean. I can't remember if I actually did this before. Boolean data. MySQL does not have built-in Boolean type. However, it uses tinyInt1 instead. Okay, so if we use Boolean, it's going to use tinyInt. And so if it's 0, stored in the field, it's false. Any other value is considered true. To use Boolean literals, you can use constants true and false that evaluate to 1 and 0 respectively. Okay, so what that means is if we want to insert a record using the database, we can do insert into movie, values, and so we know that the movie has an ID, so let's give it an ID, and that's an integer of 3. Actually, let's go 999, and next is the name, movie name. That's the name of the movie. And next is the whether it's been watched or not. So false, did not watch that one. And what was the last one? Rating. We'll give it a rating of 3. Semicolon. See my syntax. Okay. It says it's okay. Now we need to select star from movie, that's the table, semicolon. So now we have a record in there. Now, we're not going to write the SQL to insert all the records in here. That's what the web app is for. All right, so we can go back now because we've got everything we need set up, except we haven't tested the connection here. But actually, we know this works because we use this to create a table. So this all works. All right, how do we add in a record in the code? So let's take a look here. My goal here within the next 29 minutes is to show you how to insert records from the Python code and how to retrieve records using the Python and the object relational mapper. And then from there, you should have enough to do something, because all of this stuff is mostly set up. See if you can get this to work. Did you guys have MariaDB installed? I cannot remember. Darn it. Well, email, if you're watching this right now, and during this step where you did service MariaDB start or service MariaDB status, and it's saying, hey, that doesn't exist, you need to install MariaDB, which is, well, just message me if it's a problem. Okay. Because you can't make it very far if you don't have this. Okay. So in the code, let's find the example here, because I don't remember the exact syntax here. Now run the following commands one at a time to add data to the database. So to create a record in Python, we are going to use this constructor, and this one takes in a name just like ours, right? We created that here. Our movie constructor down here only takes in a name. Remember, the self is just something we have to do in Python. Don't make sure you include it, but don't worry about it too much yet. Okay, So this is how we create the object. This db.session.add is how we put it in the tube that when we hit send, we'll shoot it from the Python into the database. So this is just queuing up things to send to the database. Okay, they're creating another one and adding that to the session also. And then this right here is the big red button to launch. Once you hit this, it's in the database. All right. So let's go ahead and take these. We'll have to change some things here. So when do we want to add a record to the database? Well, when people click the add button, right? So we go down to that route here, the add route. This is where they take in the information from the form. They check a bunch of stuff. You know, if you made errors, send them, redirect them back to the home page. Now that's all that. And then down here, they're going to return the render template add confirmation.html. So we can either do it there or in the add conf. Yeah, we'll have to do it here. Okay. So here we want to add the movie to the database. So we'll have to get rid of this, and I'm realizing now I don't need this. And shift, home, delete. Got that. Make sure it's created correctly. Lay down. Stay. All right. So here we're going to create the object, which we need to use movie, because that's what we have. And instead of putting a literal here, because it'll add that movie every time, we want to pass in the value. It's weird that they're not using that here. So the string for the name of the movie, which is new movie. All right. And so it'll pass that string in. The constructor is set to handle one argument, which is the name of the movie. This will add that object into the, at the beginning of the, shoves it in the rocket on line 122. Line 124 is launching it to the database. I don't know why I'm committed to this analogy of that, but anyway. You need to be able to imagine in your mind what's going on, or it's never going to make sense. So now, in our app, let's make sure the server is running. It is. And now, if we open it, do I still have it open in here? Yes. Okay. Let's go back to the home page. And I want to add a movie. Let's add The Matrix. Add it. The Matrix has been added to your watch list. And then if we look in the terminal, it did some stuff in here. Right here. Insert into movie. Name, watched, rating. The values were name. These are pulled from the object. Okay. Name is The Matrix. Watched is 0. Rating is 0. And we can check now to see if that's in the database by doing select star from movie and semicolon. And now we just created a web app that can take in user input and store it in a database. All right. And if we close the site, if we do anything and then come back, this is still going to be here saved in the database. So how do we get it out? That's the last part I want to cover today. It says to get the database, to get data from the database, run the following. So this is going to do a select star from all. You do the name of the table, you do query, and you do all. This is the same as select star from from movie. Select star from movie. This one's select star from task, but we don't have tasks. So let's grab that in here. And we want to see, no longer do we want the list of movies to use a hard-coded list. We want it to pull from the database. So get current watch list, instead of returning this list, needs to do this tasks equal task.queryAll. That will store a list of all of the information here. But we only want the names. Well, it's just, how do we want to do this? Okay, we want to return we'll make a loop to go through and pull out the names. You could do that, or I think it would be better to just pull it out of the database here that way. So let's look up SQL or Flask, SQL Alchemy, query. Okay, we want querying records. Receive a user by username. Filter by da-da-da. That gets all the information. Get a user by primary key. That's not what we want. Okay. Let's see. We might it might be just meant to use they might assume that they want us to use a loop to do this. So let's try one more time. SQL Alchemy query return one field. Alright, someone else had the problem. That makes me feel good that I'm not the only one. Alright. The query object accepts entities query, so just pass it user.id. Okay. Session.query user ID. So let's try that. So into movies, we will put movie.query name. Let's see, make sure we got the syntax right. Movie. Oh, I'm sorry. Session.query. Period at the end. Oh, because they're extending it down. I see. Okay. So, well, let's try it and let's just see what happens. We don't need this. Okay. But instead of returning this, we will return movies. Let's see if that blows everything up. the server. It stopped, so restart it. Okay, it's working. Go back to the site. And go back to the home page. Name is not defined. What do they have here? And there's in the example, they had session.query, and then we should do movie.name, I think. That's what we need to do. Now it's mad about that. Nope. Okay. Now, make sure the server's on. It is. Alright. We can go back. Okay. Go to the home page. Session is not defined. Okay, where am I putting this? Is equal session. DB. Oh. DB.session. There we go. So this is the problem when you use other people's solutions. You have to pay attention to what exactly they're doing first, figure that out, and then reverse engineer it into your own whatever you need. Okay, so server's still running. Let's try this one more time. Object-based query has no length. No len. What does that mean? Then we do dot all. Then we do dot all. Dot all. Because we want all the records, but we only want the field of name from the movie table. Okay. Now we can check this out. We still have 15 whole minutes. We're almost done. Okay, so now we can see, that we can worry about the formatting later. I want to add, hey, it worked as a movie. So if I add it, it has been added to your watch list. Go back. There it is. Let's close this. Actually, let's open it in an incognito window. So this will have no session information. It will not know who we are. And if it pulls that information, we'll know it's getting it from the database. Where did that go? Here we go. Incognito windows are extremely useful for testing things in web apps. All right, and there it is. It pulled up that information. So if I close this, and I close this, everything's closed. I can open this. Go back to the site. Hey, everything's there because it's in the database. And we can see that if we go to the database. We can do select star from movie to grab all the records. There are my 3 records. And I guess I forgot that this is a feature of the object relational mapper. It is automatically incrementing the ID number for us. And so I was just taking that for granted because I totally forgot about dealing with that, but it's built in. It's probably because we called it ID. I think it's because we called it ID here. Definitely has to be an integer, but I believe if we call it ID here, it's going to look for that, especially if we set it as a primary key. Then we can use auto increment. Okay. So, wow, I'm only 2 minutes over. That is, I don't think there was anything else here. If you want to see this working, you know, they've got the code on here. So it's going to look a lot like ours. Here's all the setup stuff. They have theirs on localhost 8889. I think that's for Macs. So we have to use the 3306 for that. Everything else is the same. He's using the task model. And we need to change ours. You can have multiple classes here for different tables. And we'll have to talk about how to do relationships and things like that. Okay. So with that, you should have enough to get started on the next project. Do look at the rest of those Get It Done app and try building it yourself as more practice. The Build-A-Blog should have enough now to do this. Okay. List and create blog posts. Okay. Using templates. Using query parameters. Done all that. Okay. Did all that. Okay, yeah, you have everything you need to do this. So start it as soon as you can, or continue working on wherever you are. But if you need help, remember, we can schedule a meeting and I can help you get things running. You saw how many different things have to be working for this to work, and you have to have knowledge of how they work so you can keep them working. And I can help you if you're not sure about any of those certain things, yada yada. Email me if you need help. I will see you guys next week. All right, have a good day.